Hello, and welcome back to the Millennial Minute. In some of my last videos, I kind of talked about or referenced the wealth gap. So for this video, I kind of want to maybe break down wealth gaps a little bit further. So this video is called Mechanisms of the Wealth Gap. America has the largest wealth gap of any post-industrialized nation, and it has been steadily increasing since the late 1970s. I personally believe that a wealth gap is one of the most significant standalone indicators that an economy is in trouble. This is because a wealth gap by itself represents and encompasses multiple other factors that could lead to implosion or failure of an economy. To the way I see it, there are two primary factors that lead to a significant wealth gap, and those are ownership and inheritance. And the third secondary factor, so there's two primary factors and there's a secondary factor that kind of encompasses other factors, but I'll get to that later. And that third secondary factor is the creation of inequality. So you have ownership and inheritance, and then the creation of inequality. Okay, so to kind of lay the foundation for this explanation, I'll give you guys an example of, say, like a football team. Say you're trying to start like a football team of like any group of kids, like in like teenagers or something, but it's like from any neighborhood, like any school, like whatever, and you just do like an open tryouts because you're trying to like start a team. And say like 100 kids show up. So 100 kids show up and they're all waiting to play, and you obviously need equipment to play. So you kind of purchase all your own equipment, but then you're thinking like, I need to like get some reimbursement or something for this equipment because it was expensive. So you take all the 100 kids who are trying out, who want to play, and you say, okay, well, if you guys want to play, you have to pay like say $15 for your equipment. And then with that, you host a fundraiser too, because these are like teenagers. Say they're not old enough to have a job. Say they're not like 16 yet, or 18, I guess. Like 16 is when I started working. But anyway, so say that the only way they could make the money is either to participate in the fundraiser or like get the money from their parents. So now imagine you have 100 kids. They're all from different neighborhoods. Some of them have come from like really, like 2-story like mansion houses, big screen TVs, double-decker fridges, whatever. And then you got some kids just like, from the hoods, like the trailers and whatever. But you tell them they got to pay for equipment, and it's only $15. Any kid who really wants to play on that team, the rich kids, they'll probably just go ask their parents, and then they don't need to do nothing, just sit inside and wait for the next practice. But the poor kids, they'll get out and do the fundraiser, they'll earn the $15, and then when the tryouts come, all 100 kids, or maybe 98 or whatever, maybe say 2 kids don't make it, everybody's kind of go at it, and then say your team has only like 16 kids or something, so out of 100, you get 16 who end up on the team. So that's like, say you make it $15, and that's how much the equipment is, and then that's one scenario. But then say you take that equipment, and then you're like greedy as hell. You're like, well, I had to pay for all this equipment, and I don't, and like I want to make a bunch of money off of it. I don't want to just have them use it. I want to also sell it and make a profit. So you make the equipment $500 for each kid. So at this point, these kids are not old enough to have jobs. So basically anybody whose parents, because you're not going to be able to earn it in a fundraiser in a couple of days or a week or whatever. So basically in this situation, if you raise the equipment to the price of where it's like $500, the only kids who are going to play on your team are the ones who have rich parents, because they're the only ones who are going to pay $500. And even the ones that have rich parents, they may say, well, it's too bad, buddy, you're playing hockey or you're playing soccer, like you're going to do something else, because I'm not going to give them $500, just for you to play on that team, even if you could be really good, so anyway, so you had 100 kids, but then say like you kind of cut that number down, like you just take 30, make 35 of them, and they can't afford the $500, so poof, all those kids are just out of the running. So then you have whatever kids are left, and you run the tryouts, you get 16 kids, and you have your team. What do you think is going to probably happen? Well, I'll tell you, as it relates to this example, what I think would probably happen. You know, you have 30 or 40 kids. You may have, you know, some of these kids from these neighborhoods who couldn't play, or parents didn't want to give them the money. I mean, some of them could have just been average. I mean, some of them could have been the biggest kids out on the field. You know, some of them could have been the ones with the best arm. You know, they could have been fast, whatever, had the best knowledge for plays, you know, but because they couldn't pay the $500, they're no longer even able to be on your team. So basically my point is, there's like, you may successfully make yourself rich off the equipment because you're able to get some people to buy it for $500, but still you didn't get the revenue from all the people that quit, because, you know, they didn't even want to pay it. So that kind of balances things out a little bit anyway. You know, you didn't make a huge profit. And then on top of that, when you go to face these other teams, if they only made their kids pay $15 and all 100 of their kids got to try out, you know, so they got the best possible kids, you know, so chances are your team's not going to maybe do so well unless you get real lucky or something. Anyway, so keep that whole thing in mind. It was kind of random, but I'm going to kind of bring it back in now. So that situation right there is an example of ownership and inheritance. When I'm talking about ownership, a lot of people think ownership like I own a car, I own a house, whatever. Like, that's definitely ownership, but ownership can also refer to like say the job market, or say like education, like in a way, like before you get to that opportunity, like you're kind of like trying out for the team, you know what I mean? Like, and then the people who are accepting you onto the team, they're like the owners of that opportunity. You know, they're the ones who tell you how much the equipment costs. And so when I say ownership, it's like the coaches were the ones who owned the opportunity to be on that team, and they made it so that inheritance was basically the criteria for their team members. Maybe not so much talent, because they threw in the $500 factor there, like in the last part. So anyway, so that's an example of ownership and inheritance, which are the primary factors that set the stage for a wealth gap. And then the secondary factors are, it's one secondary factor, which is creating inequality, but it consists of, in my mind, three different things. There's adverse incentives, which if you take an economics class or maybe even watch the news or whatever or something, you probably heard what an adverse incentive is. It's like an incentive to not do things the best possible productive way or whatever. It's kind of more like in a business, it benefits yourself, not the business as a whole. Maybe like, say, a manager, like trying to think of a good example, and I don't want to get too stuck on this, but okay, adverse incentive, a manager promotes somebody that they like, or they do something that, like, you know, like benefits themselves, you know, but they don't, like say they don't delegate the work properly because they want to make themselves look good, but it ends up making it so the project takes longer and is less good. So like they had like an adverse incentive to do something that ended up negatively affecting the team itself. So there's adverse incentives and discrimination. I mean, everybody knows what that is. And then there's a third one, which is kind of like what I was using in an example, but I think it's a big thing, and I kind of titled this myself, and I don't know if it's a concept anywhere else, but the third one is called price gouging. And price gouging is when the owners of an opportunity, like I talked about before, you know, owners of an opportunity or a resource set the price so high that the only way to participate is to inherit like money to participate in that opportunity. Examples like in nowadays economy could be like rent prices, you know, like in housing being set higher than a full-time minimum wage job will offer. So you are either working two jobs, you either have a job that you couldn't get if you're only 16 or 18, or you get the inheritance from the parents, and that's the only way you're going to make the living situation. You know, or say college price being set where even a full-time job and maximum student loans, you can't afford, you know, all your essentials. You know, like it may cover your tuition, but then you have no money left over for food or, you know, a place to stay or whatever. And I've seen that happen. When I was in community college, I knew a guy who was homeless who went to KCC. But so anyway, eventually what happens with this, so the price gouging creates a barrier to entry, and that's like an economic term, which anyway, if you guys have questions about that, you can put that in the comments and I'll explain it. But anyway, it creates a barrier to entry off of inherited wealth. And eventually what this does is it reorders society so that all of the wealth is in the hands of the few and not the many. Okay, so you guys are probably having flashbacks when I just said that, so, you know, does that sound familiar? Well, it should. Let me rephrase that statement. Inheritance and ownership, coupled with the price gouging tactic, is like the number one jam of the 1%. I mean, that's kind of basically what made that them the way it is. So additionally, when you include the factors of adverse incentives and discrimination, this just further inhibits the natural outcomes of the market, as well as lays the foundation for volatility. Like people protesting and whatever and getting pissed off, or creating like a Venezuela type situation. But anyway, maybe that's not a good example. But anyway, if you guys got questions about anything I say, just pop it in the comments and I'll answer it. But anyway, let's just look at discrimination. Everybody knows what that is, but I'll just lay down a little example of it. For example, discrimination in the job market, it inhibits natural competition because the owner of the opportunity, say like a hiring manager, nominates who they want. Say they got a bunch of applicants and they just pick somebody based on who they want. Maybe their friend's kid or something, or it's based on gender or race or something like that. Anyway, this situation basically it does not allow the natural selection to take place, because again, you got that pool of applicants, say like 100 kids, but instead of letting them all go for it, you pick the one you want based off something that doesn't have to do with how well they throw the ball or how fast they run or whatever. So it just messes up the natural selection. And to speak to the volatility part, it kind of causes people to question the virtue of the opportunity and the entire situation itself. Like even education, it causes people to question the virtuousness of the institution. If people are allowed to buy their way into school, or it doesn't have, it's not like the best of the best are the only ones who get into the best schools. People go, well, why am I wasting my time with this? What's the degree worth? So anyway, that makes people desire change, which could create a volatile situation. So anyway, this whole thing, I'm laying it down, and some of you may be thinking this is like social justice issues, maybe mixed with economics, but you might be thinking, well, this is a moral issue. He's not really talking about an economics issue, for all practical purposes. But if you're going to ask me that question, I'm going to tell you my answer is that it's both. And here's why. Ownership and inheritance together are like the Achilles heel of capitalism, because this circumstance alone, with or without the other factors, makes the free market no longer free market, which is detrimental to capitalism. And what I mean by that is that what produces the most advantageous outcomes in capitalism, I'm sure you're picking up on this by now, and I tried to layer it so that would make sense. But what produces the most advantageous outcomes in capitalism in a natural free market system is competition. As I alluded to earlier in all my previous examples, like inheritance and ownership creates a barrier to entry that inhibits the natural competition. Likewise, when you add more and more price gouging, you have a more and more narrowed biased pool of applicants, which results in economic inefficiency. Additionally, if these circumstances pervade all industries, it creates a systemic inefficiency. Like say it's in the real estate market, say it's in the like healthcare, engineering, like anything, like education, anything, any system that it touches, it creates that inefficiency in that system. And if it's system wide, it's systemic. It's a systemic reduction of the strength of your economy. And this can be observed in the microeconomic level with regards to the individual and their inhibited or uninhibited ability to contribute to the greater economy, which is basically what I just explained. And it can also be observed in the macroeconomic level. So this is why I added this segment in, is because what I just explained was kind of more like the individual and the way they like kind of contribute to the whole team or the whole economy, but it's just one person's kind of journey, like their participation part. And that in the study of economics is microeconomics, but there's also a macroeconomic side, which is and you can observe that very clearly in the example of industry monopolies. And if you don't know what that is, please feel free to look up monopolies in economics. And again, you can ask me any questions you want to ask me. This video would be really long if I broke down all the terms and stuff, but I'd be happy to do it later if you need any explanations. But anyway, monopolies, industry monopolies in economics are defined as being overpriced and underproductive. And here's like the reason why. The reason for the inefficiency in both levels is that without natural competition, price and quality and productivity remain unchallenged. For example, you know, with a monopoly, say there's only one pizza restaurant on the block. You know, so if you want pizza, you have to go to that restaurant, even if it's overpriced and it does not taste great like all the time. Say it's good sometimes, but you know, sometimes it's not. You know, it depends on if the workers want to do good or not. Sometimes it's cold, man, it tastes like cardboard or whatever. However, if they're, you know, if that's, you know, like if that's the only restaurant, that's the only place you can get pizza. You know, however, if there were several restaurants on the block, you know, that one may not survive, because what would happen is, like, you know, all the restaurants would be competing for the people walking around on the street, and people would eventually, word of mouth, you know, commercials, like whatever, they would say this restaurant's good, this one's not, this one's okay, but it's better priced, I'll go there when I'm kind of broke. But it would work itself out naturally in a capitalist market to where you and the restaurant that's not really meeting the customer's needs wouldn't last. You know, but in a monopoly it would, because they're the only one. And in economics, like a monopoly can be achieved through there being barriers to entry for other people to not be able to get into the market, so to speak. Say like the loan to get a pizza restaurant is so high that, like, you have to put down a huge amount of your own money that, like, a lot of people don't have. Anyway, I guess I'll wrap this up. You know, so this to me is why a wealth gap is one of the most significant standalone factors. Like, by itself, it indicates, you know, that there's trouble in an economy, because, you know, as you've seen from my example, you know, it alludes to systemic inefficiency and volatility. You know, so you know, I guess in a way to fully summarize this in kind of like a non-nuts and bolts, non-economic type of way, it's like you have to truly believe in equality to truly believe in capitalism. If you don't truly believe in equality, then you don't truly believe in capitalism. You may say you do, but you don't really, in a way. And I'll throw in one more example with that, and then it's the end of the video. When I was growing up, like, one of my first jobs was me and my brother and one of our best friends started a lawn mowing business in our neighborhood. And this was old school back in the day. Like maybe one of us had a cell phone. You know, so what we did is we went on our friend's computer, we printed out, you know, like little flyers and stuff, and we rode our bikes around to all the houses that had long lawns, and we tossed it on there, and we followed up, because pretty much, like, nobody called us, but when we followed up, they were like, knock on their door, they're like, okay, we'll give you guys a chance or whatever. You know, so anyway, we did it for a couple years, like, we were really on it. But at some point, one of the other groups in our neighborhood, one of our you know, they're friends of us, but, you know, we saw them trying to cut a lawn of, like, people right across the street from us. And we went home to our dad, and we were all pissed. We're like, they're freaking copying us. They literally saw what we were doing, you know, and then they started doing the same exact freaking thing right next to us. And but I mean, that right there is where I kind of really truly had to be humbled, and I learned what capitalism was. I was 13, so I'm not embarrassed to tell the story now that I was pissed off, because I'm not anymore. Because you know, basically what my dad told me is he said that's capitalism, and he said, and that's what was one of the things that made America like a great country, was the fact that anybody can start a business, anybody can compete for the same opportunity. And he said that, he's like, oh, why, you know, he's like, oh, you know, he was a mechanic, so he can fix anything, you know, so he was like, oh, I know you guys can work harder than them, I know you guys can do a better job than them, but he made sure to tell us that if you don't, like, if you do a crappy job and you don't double check your work and you let those other guys do better than you, then you have no like right to complain, you know, if they take your customers. And anyway, that really sunk into me, because it was a wake-up call for me that you have to truly believe in equality, to truly believe in capitalism. You have to let other people have a chance, and if you win, then good, but you're gonna have to win through hard work. You know, you can't just rig the game and then expect things to be okay and say, oh, well, I'm a capitalist. Well, no, you're not. Not if you don't allow everybody to have a fair chance. Anyway, that's Mechanisms of the Wealth Gap. Third episode of Millennial Minute. And I'm your host, Brian. Thanks for watching.